Breaks as requested. Asterisk I am going to tell you the story of a woman whose life was built on sacrifice, silence, and unconditional giving until the day everything she believed about love and family collapsed in front of her eyes. Her name in this version is Margaret Collins, a 74-year-old retired university professor living in San Diego, California. A woman who had spent her entire life believing that a mother's duty is to give without limits and never ask for anything in return. She had one daughter named Jessica Collins, now 43 years old, married to Mark Reynolds, a businessman who always appeared ambitious but financially unstable. Margaret had raised Jessica alone after her husband passed away, working extra hours at the university, tutoring students at night, and saving every possible dollar just to make sure her daughter never felt the absence of anything in life. She paid for her education, her medical needs, her university degree, her wedding, and later even helped her buy a luxury beachfront house in one of the most expensive areas of San Diego. She never saw it as burden but as love, the kind of love she believed every mother should give. Years passed and Jessica became successful in business, but emotionally distant. She rarely visited her mother and mostly contacted her only when she needed help, financial or personal. Still, Margaret never complained. She convinced herself that this is how modern life is. Children become busy and mothers must understand. On Jessica's 43rd birthday, Margaret arrived early at her daughter's house carrying her favorite chocolate almond cake from a French bakery and a small velvet box containing a pearl necklace that once belonged to her own mother, a symbol of 3 generations of women she believed were connected by love and sacrifice. She stepped out of the taxi with trembling hands but a warm smile, her turquoise dress carefully chosen, hoping that today she would feel like a mother again. When she rang the doorbell, she imagined Jessica smiling, hugging her, maybe even crying with joy like she did when she was a child. But when the door opened, everything she expected disappeared in an instant. Jessica stood there looking at her phone first and then at her mother with visible irritation and said coldly, "Oh, it's you," without emotion, without warmth, as if she was an unwanted guest rather than the woman who gave her life. Margaret still smiled gently and said, "Happy birthday, my dear. I brought your favorite cake and a small gift." Jessica sighed deeply and stepped aside without even making eye contact, telling her to just place everything in the kitchen because she was busy. Margaret walked into the house she had financially supported for years, the marble floors, luxury furniture, and ocean view all paid indirectly through her sacrifices. She placed the cake on the counter while hearing laughter outside where her twin grandsons were playing in the pool with a nanny and they didn't even notice her presence. That moment felt strange to her, like she was invisible inside a life she had built. After some time, Jessica entered the kitchen dressed perfectly, expensive makeup, polished nails. A lifestyle funded by years of Margaret's support. She took a drink from the fridge and asked coldly if her mother was just there to drop off the cake or planning to stay and interrupt her plans. Margaret quietly said she just wanted to spend time with her because they had not met properly in months. Jessica rolled her eyes and said she had dinner plans with Mark and didn't have time for emotional drama. Margaret tried again softly, saying she only wanted connection, but Jessica suddenly became sharp and said she felt suffocated by her mother's constant presence, that she needed freedom and space, that her life was not her mother's project. Every word cut deeper than the last, but the final blow came when Jessica looked at her and said in a cold tone that the only thing she truly wanted for her birthday was for her mother to disappear from her life, preferably to die. The silence that followed was unbearable. Margaret felt her entire body freeze as if the air had left the room. Decades of love, sacrifice, and devotion collapsed in a single sentence. She tried to speak but her voice broke. Jessica continued, saying she was tired of emotional dependency and constant interference, that she could not breathe because of her presence. Margaret slowly looked at the cake she had brought, still untouched, candles never lit, dreams never shared. She picked up her purse and the small pearl box with shaking hands and walked toward the door while Jessica returned to her phone without looking back. At the door, Margaret stopped for a moment, hoping for even a single sign of regret but saw none, only impatience for her to leave. She whispered happy birthday and walked out, and in that moment something inside her changed forever. Not anger, not revenge, but a silent awakening that would reshape her entire existence. She returned to her small apartment in downtown San Diego, the same place she had moved after selling her family home years ago to support Jessica's dreams. That night she sat alone in silence, remembering every sacrifice, from selling her jewelry for medical treatments to paying for education, weddings, and endless financial crises. And for the first time she asked herself a question she had never dared before: what about my life? And that question became the beginning of everything that was about to change. American names, continuation plus transformation plus consequences plus Islamic moral lesson subtly included at end as requested. After that night Margaret Collins did not cry endlessly like before. Instead she sat in silence with a strange clarity she had never experienced in her life, as if something inside her had finally broken free from decades of emotional weight. The next morning she woke up not as a defeated mother but as a woman slowly realizing her own existence. She opened an old box filled with financial records, receipts, and legal documents and began to calculate everything she had given to Jessica over the years, from school fees, university expenses, wedding costs, medical bills, house down payments, luxury lifestyle support, and emergency financial rescues. The number exceeded millions of dollars, but what shocked her more was not the money, it was the realization that she had never once invested that energy into herself. She had lived as if her entire purpose was to disappear into someone else's life. Slowly she made decisions she had never imagined before. She went to the bank and closed joint accounts. She reviewed legal agreements she had co-signed for Jessica's property. She contacted her financial advisor and began restructuring everything in her name. For the first time she did not think about who would be affected emotionally, she only thought about her own survival. Meanwhile Jessica noticed her mother's absence. Calls went unanswered, messages remained unread, and slowly frustration turned into panic, especially when financial complications started appearing in her household as her husband Mark's unstable investments collapsed and mortgage payments became difficult. The luxury lifestyle she once enjoyed began to crumble under real-world pressure. Jessica tried calling her mother repeatedly but Margaret no longer responded, not out of hatred but out of peace, a peace she had never known before. Days turned into weeks and Margaret began rebuilding her life in a completely different direction. She joined community groups, started learning painting, enrolled in language classes, and even began planning to move abroad. She met people who respected her not for what she could give but for who she was. Meanwhile Jessica slowly began facing consequences of neglecting financial responsibility and emotional respect. The house they once lived in became unstable, debts increased, and for the first time she began to feel the absence of the mother she had once dismissed, not as a provider but as a human being. Eventually a social services inquiry was initiated after Jessica tried to claim her mother was mentally unwell, but medical evaluation confirmed Margaret was completely healthy, mentally stable, and fully aware of her decisions, proving that her actions were not confusion but conscious liberation. Months later Margaret moved to Barcelona, Spain, where she started a peaceful life surrounded by art, culture, and genuine friendships. She began writing her story anonymously at first, which later turned into a widely read book inspiring thousands of women across different countries who had experienced emotional sacrifice in family relationships. Her message was not about hatred or revenge, but about balance, dignity, and self-respect. Meanwhile Jessica eventually received legal and financial consequences of decisions made over years, and slowly she began to understand the depth of what she had lost. One day Margaret received a message from her grandsons expressing love and understanding, which deeply moved her. And later even Jessica sent an apology acknowledging her mistakes, but Margaret did not return to her old life, because some truths once understood cannot be reversed, and now living peacefully she reflects on a deeper lesson that exists across all cultures and beliefs, that parents are not meant to be used or taken for granted, their sacrifices are not replaceable, and even when disagreements or mistakes happen, respect and gratitude remain essential, because time does not always give second chances, and relationships are not built on convenience but on mutual dignity. And the question she now asks herself and others is simple yet powerful: do we truly value those who gave us everything while they are still with us, or only realize their worth when silence replaces their presence? And in the end she understands a timeless truth that love without respect becomes pain, and gratitude without action becomes regret, and this is what she carries forward as her final lesson to the world. story teaching family relationships hold a deeply respected and sacred position, especially the bond between parents and children, which is not seen as a casual social connection but as a responsibility, trust, and lifelong duty of care and respect. Parents are given a very high status because they sacrifice their comfort, time, health, and entire lives for their children without expecting anything in return, and children are taught to respond with gratitude, kindness, and humility, even when they grow up and become independent. The idea is not perfection from either side but recognition of effort and maintaining respect in all circumstances. Similarly, parents are also guided to treat their children with mercy, fairness, and emotional understanding, not control or harshness, because the relationship is built on balance, not dominance from either side. When this balance breaks, misunderstandings and emotional distance begin to grow, and that is where pain enters families. In situations where a child may act wrongly, become ungrateful, or speak hurtful words, the guidance is not to respond with hatred or complete rejection, but to correct with wisdom, patience, and emotional maturity, while also setting healthy boundaries so that no one is exploited or emotionally drained. And at the same time, children are reminded that even if parents are imperfect or make mistakes, their rights and sacrifices can never truly be repaid, only respected and acknowledged, because no amount of money or action can replace the years of care, sleepless nights, and silent struggles a parent goes through. So the ideal approach is balance between gratitude and self-respect, between love and boundaries, and between forgiveness and wisdom. Now, if we reflect on this, a few important questions arise for every person. Do we truly value our parents while they are still with us, or only realize their importance when they are no longer available? Do we sometimes take their sacrifices for granted without realizing the emotional cost behind them? And on the other side, are parents sometimes over-sacrificing to the point where they lose their own identity and then feel hurt when expectations are not met? And the deeper question is, how can both sides communicate better before pain turns into distance? Because every relationship is a test of understanding, not just emotion, and the real lesson is that respect, gratitude, and kindness should never depend on convenience or benefit, but should remain a constant principle in how we treat those who gave us life and care. So it becomes important for each of us to ask ourselves honestly, are we building our family relationships on understanding and balance, or on expectation and emotional pressure? And what changes can we make today so that love does not turn into regret tomorrow?